Our next topic is regional aspirations or regionalism. These two words are interchangeably used in political science. Regionalism means പ്രാദേശികവാദം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പ്രാദേശിക ഉത്കർഷേച്ഛകൾ, പ്രാദേശിക ചിന്താഗതികൾ. This regionalism means extreme love towards a particular region, extreme honor towards a particular region, always stand for the particular region. They always argued for the particular region rather than the nation is regionalism. സ്വന്തം രാഷ്ട്രത്തേക്കാൾ പ്രാധാന്യം സ്വന്തം പ്രദേശത്തിന് നൽകുന്ന ചിന്താഗതി. This is regional aspiration or regionalism. In India, many regions are there. The regionalism exists. Extreme regionalism exists. For example, Jammu Kashmir, Nagaland, Mizoram, and some parts of Tamil Nadu are the examples for regional areas, or regionalism exists there. So we have to go through these places. All these places are known as tension areas. Many difficulties and problems exist there. One among them is Jammu and Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir. All we know that there is no such a state exist in India. Recently, our central government dissolved Jammu Kashmir and changed it into two union territories, namely Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. But ethnically and originally, Jammu Kashmir has three regions: Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. We have to go through the ethnicity or the history of Jammu Kashmir. Majority of the people in Jammu Kashmir are Muslims and they have their own identity. They always like to keep this identity. This identity is Kashmiriyat. They have their own culture. They have their own language, etc. Then, examining the history of Jammu Kashmir, all we know that Jammu Kashmir was one of the princely states at the time of independence. We have studied that hundreds of princely states existed in India at the time of independence. Jammu Kashmir was one among them. But the ruler of that Jammu Kashmir was Hindu ruler Maharaja Hari Singh. One part, he stood still without joining either Pakistan or in India. At that time, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who gave an opportunity to this Maharaja Hari Singh either to stand still or to join in India, but he disliked to join either in India or in Pakistan. He decided to stand still, a free state. During that course of time, there was another leader in Jammu Kashmir, namely Sheikh Abdullah. His political party was National Conference. He had great support of the people and his party was closely related with the Indian National Congress. Such a party was existed in Jammu Kashmir at that time. During that period, some intruders, tribal invaders from Pakistan attacked Jammu Kashmir, the princely states. The prince could not cope with the situation. To fight against the tribes, he requested the help of the Indian army. Utilizing this situation, Indian army reached Jammu Kashmir to fight against the tribal intruders. It was very simple as far as the Indian army is concerned. But India government, prior to that, India government decided to sign an instrument of accession, a kind of agreement to join India after the intruders gone. Then Jammu Kashmir became a part of India. Later, Sheikh Abdullah and his political party, National Conference, demanded more autonomy to Jammu Kashmir. Autonomy means കൂടുതൽ സ്വയംഭരണ അവകാശം ആവശ്യപ്പെട്ടു. For this, India government allotted Article 370 in the constitution to Jammu Kashmir. According to this article, Jammu Kashmir had greater autonomy. They had their own flag, their own laws. They did not want to agree with the laws made by Indian Parliament. They could keep their own identity and culture, and many of the benefits provided this article. As you know, recently our central government made this article invalid, and now Jammu Kashmir divided into two union territories. In those days, this Sheikh Abdullah brought many reforms to the people of India, and after that election he became the chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Even now the disputes are there, border disputes with Pakistan and water disputes with Pakistan are going on. Anyhow, Jammu Kashmir even now continue as a tension area. So all this information we have to kept in mind while studying the regionalism in Jammu Kashmir. They always tried to keep their culture, their identity as their own. That was the regionalism exist in Jammu and Kashmir. Yes, the next best example for regionalism is the work of Dravidian movement, the movement of the Dravidian people. Later, this Dravidian movement changed into DK, Dravida Kazhagam, and after that DMK, Dravida Munneta Kazhagam, a famous political party in Tamil Nadu. E.V. Ramaswamy was known as the founding father of this movement. What caused the foundation of this movement? This movement was against the dominance of the Brahmins from the north. They were not ready to accept the domination of the Brahmin people, especially from the north. And they were against political, economic and cultural domination of the north. Time the people from the north, especially the Brahmins, had their own hand in the total administration of the country. But at that time the Dravidian people, especially in the part of Tamil Nadu, was totally against them. That led to the formation of the Dravidian movement. Once, with the influence of the north, the Kallakudi railway station, its name has been renamed as Dalmiapuram. It provoked the Dravidian people and they demanded to change Dalmiapuram to Kallakudi railway station. And also the DMK, Dravida Munneta Kazhagam, demanded greater importance to Tamil cultural history in the school syllabus and curriculum. That was their own demand. That was also an example for regionalism or regional aspiration. They were always against Hindi language. They supposed that the Hindi language is the symbol of the pride of the North Indians, and the people from the north were always trying to suppress the Dravidian people by imposing this type of a language upon them. So there was an anti-Hindi agitation happened in Tamil Nadu under the leadership of Dravida Munneta Kazhagam. All these factors, we can say that there were regionalism. They stood for their own land, their own region rather than the nation. Later DMK came to power in the Tamil Nadu Assembly, and after that it had a split. Many of the regional political parties emerged from this split. They were MDMK, Marumalarchi Dravida Munneta Kazhagam, and PMK, Pattali Makkal Katchi. So this area is also an area of tension, and severe regionalism or regional aspiration was existing there. Then Punjab is also an area of conflict and regionalism. Extreme regionalism was there. Agalidal was one of the famous political party in Punjab, always claimed more autonomy for Punjab. They always demanded a separate statehood for Punjab. But the Agalidal did not get the entire support of the Hindus. Anyhow, they decided to get the autonomy, entire autonomy from the central government. They conducted Anandapur conference and they introduced Anandapur resolution. Their demand was a separate Sikh nation. This is called argument for Khalistan. They demanded Khalistan, a separate nation for the Sikh, and it was the demand, and they need greater autonomy if it is a state. Agalidal, the political party, was behind this movement. Then the argument for Khalistan created great conflict in that area. Later, the radicals among the Agalidals, pushing down the moderates, they got ready for an armed rebellion against the government. They gathered together with lethal weapons and they entered to the Golden Temple. They occupied the Golden Temple in Amritsar with lethal weapons. But at the same time, the central government could not turn their face against it. Then a military operation was planned against this occupation of the terrorist Agalis. This operation is known as Operation Blue Star. The army reached the Golden Temple and they successfully flushed out the militants from the Holy Temple. But the operation brought some changes or damages to the temple. It was also hurted the minds or the faith of the Sikh people. As a result of which later it ended to the assassination of Indira Gandhi in 1984. As a result of which a great violence broke against the Sikh. Anti-Sikh riot was there. 2006 killed in that riot. Then after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, her son Rajiv Gandhi came to power in 1984. As soon as Rajiv Gandhi came to power, he signed an agreement with the Agalidal leader Harchand Singh Longowal. This was known as Punjab Accord. It had 5 agreements. Chandigarh would be transferred to Punjab. A separate commission will look into the border dispute between Punjab and Haryana. There was much more difficulty between Haryana and Punjab about their border. That should be solved by this commission. And the third agreement was a tribunal will decide sharing Ravi Bias water dispute. There was a water dispute happening between Haryana, Punjab and Rajasthan regarding the Ravi Bias river water. And the next was compensation would be provided to those affected by the military. The military action against the culprits, some people brutally injured, and then compensation should be given. And the fifth agreement, that Armed Forces Special Powers Act (AFSPA) in Punjab would be withdrawn. This is a black law. Rajiv Gandhi agreed to withdraw this black law from Punjab. Yes, the next most important area of conflict and regionalism was the northeastern part of India. There were many states: Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Mizoram, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura. They were known as 7 sisters, 7 സഹോദരികൾ. വടക്ക് കിഴക്കൻ പ്രദേശം, വടക്ക് കിഴക്കേ ഇന്ത്യ. This area has greater peculiarities. This is a landlocked area. What is a landlocked area? That means there was a small corridor of about 22 kilometers to reach the northeast part of India. So geographically, this area was isolated and the refugee problem was there. We have already learned at the time of the Bangladesh war, millions of refugees flooded to this area that created many difficulties to the people lived there. And this area was also less development. They alleged that the central government had no interest in their area. That was also another peculiarity. So they were not ready to accept the dominance of the India government. They always demanded autonomy and separate statehood. Separate state for Assamese. Separate state for Mizo. Such demands were emerged in that area. At the beginning, there were no Mizoram or Arunachal Pradesh. They were under the boundary of the Assam. The non-Assamese did not welcome the imposition of Assami languages upon them. They also demanded autonomy. During that time in Assam, the Bodos, Karbis and Dismas, they were tribes. They came forward with a demand of a separate state. After a long struggle, India government allotted a separate Assam, a state for the Assami speaking people. At that time, the Mizo Hills was also there in Assam. But at the time of the British rule, they claimed that they were not the part of India. So they did not accept the dominance of India after independence. More than that, there a severe famine occurred, but they alleged the India government failed to cope with the situation. As a result of which, MNF, Mizo National Front, under the leadership of Lal Danga was formed in Mizo area. They formed a group of army and always they fight with the Indian army created many difficulties to the people. They demanded greater autonomy, always fought against Indian army. They were not ready to accept the dominance of the India government. Then after 2 decades, when Rajiv Gandhi came to power, he signed an agreement with Lal Danga. A peace agreement was signed with Lal Danga, and later Lal Danga became the chief minister of Mizoram. And after that, in Mizoram, some peace was existed. Likewise, another place was Nagaland. They organized under the leadership of Angami Safu Fiso for a separate state, and they also demanded greater autonomy from India. All these cases came in front of the India government, and India government allotted separate statehood and some kind of autonomy up to its limit. But the problem even today has not been solved. During this period, movements against outsiders was very strong in the area of Assam. The Assam movement was one of the example, because many of the outsiders from Myanmar and Bangladesh, millions of people as refugees flooded to this area, created difficulties. We have already said it. The native people became a minority, and the voters list, included many of the foreigners came from Bangladesh and Myanmar. They could not suffer all these dealings. So a movement against outsiders emerged out in the Assam region. During that period, the student community in Assam, they introduced anti-foreigner movement in 1979. Their demand was illegal migration to Assam should be stopped. They organized different methods of strikes against the government, and after a long time, after 6 or 7 years, the government entered into negotiations with this organization, and the government assured the students' movement to stop the illegal migrants came to Assam. For a long years or a long era, all these areas turned to be a region of conflict and regionalism. And after studying this lesson, we have to learn a lot of lessons from the situation. Then we have to go through what are the lessons learned from examining all these places. All these were the tension areas. We started with Jammu Kashmir and now end with the Assam movement or movement against outsiders. Going through these lessons, we have to learn a lot of lessons. What are they? That is to be also discussed. The first lesson is nation building is an ongoing process. Nation building is an ongoing process. ദേശനിർമ്മാണം ഒരു തുടർ പ്രക്രിയയായി തുടർന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. Many of the states or many of the regions even today come to the central government for greater autonomy. So we can see that nation building has not been completed. It is going on. Nation building is an ongoing process. And the second lesson is democratic negotiations is the best way to solve the problems. Using force is the last resort. That is the second lesson. And the third one is power sharing is necessary for a democratic country. We cannot avoid in any places of India. We have to give them their own share. That is a way of keeping peace. And the fourth one is regional imbalance should be solved. No place in India can be abandoned or unnoticed anyway. That is the lesson also we have learned from this chapter. And we understood that the sixth schedule incorporated or interpolated into the constitution, by which we provide somewhat autonomy and somewhat peculiarities to some states, especially for Jammu Kashmir, Nagaland and Mizoram, etc. So going through these lessons, all we have to keep in mind these places of conflict and regionalism and what are the lessons we learned from these topics. Thank you.